We got it. It was just blowing. Good morning and welcome back to our Ask the Agronomist Facebook Live. We are here on the backside of our fields here at Alexander. Wanted to find some volunteer corn and we had to walk a little ways, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, a little ways, but not too far. So I thought today would be a good time to talk about it. I've been out in several cornfields and been noticing, there's a lot of corn on corn in the state of Iowa especially. But as you walk about, you see a lot of what you're holding in your hand there. A lot of volunteer corn showing up. And it's something that I feel is pretty important to consider. You see it in soybeans as well, so we're going to kind of talk about both and the impact of it. So first of all, the yield part, which is what everybody's concerned with, right? So when it comes to corn, the yield impact may not be as bad as soybeans. You could see up to a 13% yield loss in corn, and that's some research out of South Dakota State they did a few years back, and it showed that you can have up to a 13% yield loss with around 14,000 plants per acre, additional corn, volunteer corn. So it sounds like a lot, but when you get out and look at some of the fields, there's a lot, especially when you see these clumps. We have clumps and individual plants in this field in particular, and in general, when you see those clumps are going to be more of an issue in terms of yield than individual plants. You got to think about it, how the plant is stealing from the crop that you're trying to grow. Because this is essentially a weed. Even though you may not think of it as a weed in terms of in the cornfield, it still is, because these aren't going to produce any ears. They're going to end up being a barren plant at the end of the season. So what are they doing? They're stealing nutrients and competing for light above ground with that corn crop the whole season, as well as several other issues that you're going to have. But just in terms of yield, they're just competing and they're not going to contribute to yield. And the other problem is they don't have the same traits, and that's what a lot of people forget. And so this goes to kind of the disease management side of things, which is what I feel is more important in terms of volunteer corn, controlling that volunteer in both corn and soybeans. You got to realize that, when we get our corn hybrids out here, the breeders are taking a lot of time to cross those. They're doing the male and the female rows so that they get that hybrid and that hybrid vigor and all those traits in there. Well, when you have that pollination occurring, in your field, just hybrids out there, and then you have leftover for next year, it has reduced levels of BT, reduced, other traits that aren't as strong. And so you're putting that out there, that corn's growing, the insects are getting it, corn rootworm's going to be out there, invited to come, and chewing all these things, the diseases are going to be on that. So it's kind of harboring those diseases, those insects, to come into your field. Now, if we look and think about soybeans, we are standing in a soybean field here. It's not up yet, because of our delayed planting season. We do have some up, but in this particular area, we're not up yet. But the problem with having volunteer corn and soybeans, this is where I fear it the most, and should be easiest to control. We have a lot of great herbicides on the, grass herbicides, the FOPs and the DIMs that can control this really easily. But the problem is a lot of guys let it go too long. So, we're sitting here now, ours is just starting to emerge. This would be the time to control it, honestly, a burn down or something like that. But a lot of guys wait until their post-emerge spray when the volunteer corn is knee-high almost. And unfortunately, that gives those bugs and those diseases a lot of time to establish already. And setting yourself up for next year, the corn. And what you're trying to do with corn-soybean rotation is use those benefits to your advantage. And when you have volunteer corn in there for part of the season, that's negating all those benefits that you're trying to take advantage of. Now, if you have it staying even later, if you leave it all season in soybeans, which I still see a lot happen, especially around that time that'd be silking or they'll be going through reproduction, you're inviting those corn rootworms, it's like a red flag in the middle of a soybean field saying, hey, come land here, and they're going to lay their eggs and then they'll be there for the next season. And you got to remember that it has that reduced BT trait in it too. So if they're chewing on it, things like that, you're selecting those bugs. It's just like a weed that doesn't get maybe a full dose of a herbicide. Maybe there's a skip, or it gets part of a little drift, but it doesn't get a full shot of herbicide. You're selecting those weeds come through, and they're like, that's not enough to take me down. It's the same thing with those corn rootworms. They get a reduced level of BT, they take it in, they ingest it, and then they maintain some of that resistance for the next season.
All right, so let's talk about the next year management going forward.
Yeah, so the biggest thing to me is rotate. You know, we have a lot of guys that do corn on corn, and if you're going to do corn on corn, you need to take those steps to make sure you get rid of that corn before, maybe planting a little bit later, when you can see these little guys starting to come up, and then kill them either with tillage or a burn down herbicide. Herbicide in season obviously is very difficult with corn. You know, there are a lot of guys that typically, you know, something like Liberty would work if, you know, if you've got certain, you know, especially in soybeans, if you had Liberty Link soybeans or something, but that doesn't always work either. So you got to remember that control in corn is going to be a challenge. So the biggest thing to me is rotate, but if you can't rotate, you need to make note of your corn on corn fields right now. As I go out and look at them, to me it's pretty obvious. Make note of those ones that have really bad infestations of volunteer corn, and then go back and make sure next year whatever's causing that, you know, in the case that I saw a lot of whole ears, and typically a lot of whole ears, it can be lodging, but a lot of times it's adjustments at the header of the combine. Okay. You know, speed, whatever it is, or putting shields on it so that these don't
fly out.
Yeah, fly out of the header. Because if you're seeing a lot of whole ears on the ground, number one, you're losing a lot of yield, but you need to make those adjustments so that you don't have that. Now, when it's individual kernels, it's not quite as big of a deal. You know, we talked about the clumps versus individual, but that's something you need to remember and make note of especially if you're doing corn on corn, to try and reduce that as much as possible so you don't have that volunteer corn in your corn next year.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I think that wraps up our topic. Is there anything else you want to add?
Nope.
Okay.
I hope our beans keep coming up strong here, and we'll have plenty more topics to talk about as we go forward.
Oh, yes, of course. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, and thank you for our listeners for tuning in. Have a good day.